The blonde lady lay in a coffin among a huge number of flowers. The girl's body had long since become cold. Another hot lady stood by the box. She couldn't believe that she was the first to see her own funeral. The brunette pressed her palms to her chest, saluting the dead woman. God had decided to play a cruel joke on her. And not long before that, ordinary days were passing in the palace. The mistress of the house coughed once again, which was heard even on the street. The servants grumbled and reminded that the lady should have drunk the water carefully and slowly. The workers sighed. The maid could not imagine how exactly it was necessary to feed her ladyship properly. The girl in the bed was the only Archduchess of the Ronta Empire, Adriana von Trewick. The lady claimed that she could eat on her own. The servant doubted the mistress's abilities. She snatched the glass from her. The poor thing couldn't even resist. The servant noted that if there was no strength, it would be best to skip a meal. Adriana insisted that she could have a light soup. The worker was categorically against it. The girl sent away the second servant, who had a cart with food. She reminded how last time all the food had scattered all over the clothes and bed, which was difficult to clean up. The lady's cheeks turned red again from the temperature. The poor thing could not resist or argue with the maids, even though she was the boss. Even the nights were problematic for our heroine. In Ronte, everyone had long known about Mrs. Trovick's ill health. The girl recalled that when she was feeling a little better, she often attended many events. And so at one ball, she met her future husband. The Archduke noticed the lady immediately after her debut. Considering the girl's condition, the decision to marry was made very quickly. But Adriana's poor health was getting worse every day. The newlyweds were never able to enjoy a close relationship, so the lover decided to focus on the emperor's mission. This left the Archduchess alone with her torment. Her sense of loneliness only grew. After the wedding, the husband was constantly away. One day, the manager announced the arrival of gifts from the master for his wife. There were many large and small boxes on the table. The servant explained that the Archduke had returned to the capital, but the emperor had ordered him to come to his palace at once. Adriana wanted to see her lover instead of gifts. The girl assumed that her husband would not even come to their mansion. The servant noted that a meeting had been scheduled after the audience. The Archduke had only arrived for a day. The worker specified that he would notify the lady if the gentleman came to the house. The girl coughed again and covered her mouth with a handkerchief. She was grateful to Sir Zimsker for his work. The heroine missed her Noavian. At night, the husband finally arrived at the mansion. The guy quietly came to his beloved's room and just wanted to stroke his wife. Adriana, naturally, woke up from his touch. She was surprised to feel warm hands on her hair. It was Archduke Noavian Trevick. The guy apologized because he hadn't planned to wake his wife. The girl asked when her husband arrived at the mansion. She was upset that the servants did not wake her up and inform her immediately about her lover's arrival. Noavian specified that he had come in quite recently. So few people had seen it. The husband carefully touched his wife's hair. Adriana buried her face in the guy's torso. She said that she missed her lover very much. The husband hugged her fragile body tightly. Noavian specified that he himself could not wait for this cherished meeting. The husband climbed under the blanket. The guy was worried and asked if his beloved had taken all the medications. The girl was happy for a long time and said that she had been treated strictly according to the instructions. Noavian said that his lady love could wish for anything. The blonde noted that she did not want to spend her whole life in bed. The guy clarified that all the residents were already aware of the Archduchess's ill health. He tried to convince them that people were much kinder than they seemed, but the heroine did not believe those words. The poor guy was considered a burden and worthless even in his own home. The girl decided that the others outside the mansion were just as bad. Noavian knew very well what people thought. He declared that he was ready to cut off the head of anyone who spoke ill of her beloved wife. Adriana simply remained silent. The girl wanted to somehow repay her lover and finally fulfill her wifely duties. That night, the heroine never fell asleep. Noavian kept singing a lullaby and patted his wife's thin and fragile body pleasantly. The girl finally felt real closeness after a long time. But she had a feeling that this was the last time. The morning did not start with warm coffee. Servants ran around the mansion and called the doctor to the mistress's room. The poor thing was lying on the floor, coughing up blood. The maid ordered medicine to be brought immediately. The other workers held the Archduchess and tried to calm her down. Adriana was given a handkerchief so as not to stain anything. The heroine guessed that nothing would help her anymore. The maids gave the mistress special herbs to drink to stop the bleeding. And although she tried to swallow everything, that day really turned out to be her last. The girl imagined herself drowning in the sea. The cold water was sinking her dead body to the bottom. She asked Noevian to try to save her. The poor thing squinted her eyes from the bright sun. Adriana was surprised and thought that it was all a stupid dream. The girl fidgeted under the blanket. Someone was standing by the bed and saying that she needed to go there. She realized that she had become a brunette. It was unexpected for her that her headaches stopped tormenting her. Adriana had her first good rest. The maid asked again if Madame had heard all the instructions. The servant screamed, calling the heroine Madame Blier. The girl jumped up and did not understand why the room was different. Adriana turned to Annie. The maid was confused, because that was not her name at all. The lady understood that the servant could not have aged and grown fat so quickly. The girl assumed that it was the new nanny. The servants did not dwell on the matter and decided that the mistress was simply sleepy. The woman informed that she had to go to a funeral. Adriana had more questions. The servant said that the Archduchess had died that morning. The heroine was completely stupefied. After all, she was the only one with such a title. Now the girl did not understand anything at all. Adriana could not believe the servant's words. But the newspapers on the table confirmed the death of the Archduchess. The girl was in a cold sweat. She wanted to understand how this could have happened and how she ended up in another body. The servant reminded us of herself. The worker said that it was important for the Archduke to know whether Madame Blier was going to come to the funeral. Adriana was surprised to hear about her husband. The woman joked that after Mrs. Trowick's death, there were many chances to become Noevian's wife. The servant stated that since the Archduchess was no longer there, the true beloved could obtain this status. Blee recalled the day of her death. The heroine finally realized that the nightmare was reality and not just a dream. The girl grabbed her head. Her body ached again, but not from illness, but from fear and misunderstanding. The servant clarified that the funeral was planned to take place in the afternoon, so it was possible to eat in peace. The woman was frightened by the unnatural behavior of the lady, so she suggested that after the meal, they go and sleep some more. Adriana went to the mirror to examine her new appearance. She tried to understand how she could have died and ended up in the body of Noevian's lover. Soon the mistress came to the kitchen. The servants had probably heard about the girl's strange behavior, and in order to somehow cheer her up, they prepared a lot of delicious food. Blee sat down at the table. She admired how beautiful everything looked. The heroine had long forgotten about the feeling of hunger. The servants assumed that the mistress was not in the ark. The woman wanted to remove one of the plates, but Adriana asked to leave it, as she wanted to try everything. The heroine decided to ask the maid's name. The worker was taken aback and even shuddered at such stupid questions. The girl realized that the servant was one of those people who said rude things. The maid revealed that her name was Marge. The woman also said that the missus had been hysterical and crying for the past few days. Adriana listened attentively to everything. The heroine found out that she was in the body of Countess Blier Acacia. The girl knew the lady's husband very well. The gray-haired man was a vassal of the Archduke. He was not capable of taking a high position because of his character. The old man married young Bleacha. But the heroine didn't even know about it because she was constantly ill and missed all the events. Adriana was surprised by how much she resembled the Countess, but this only made her more angry and upset. Marge interrupted her thoughts. The servant asked that if the mistress had decided to go crazy, she should do it beautifully. The heroine was taken aback by such statements. The worker was pleasantly surprised that the girl ate everything so quickly, so she decided to go and get something else. Adriana understood that it was impossible to talk about transformation because there would be problems. The brunette clutched the spoon. She was surprised that after a long time, she could finally eat with her hands and enjoy the food. Adriana leaned back in her chair. The girl was glad that this body was very healthy. And for the first time, she ate her fill. A large guy entered the room. Madame realized that he was a servant sent by the Archduke. The servant was worried. He asked what answer to give to Mr. Trowick. Adriana could not believe that Blier was Novian's lover. The girl asked for a little more time to think about it. Soon the heroine returned to her chambers. The maids were watching her. The servants were shocked that the mistress was reading a simple newspaper. The girls reasoned that it was the first time they had seen Madame so calm. It seemed that before her rebirth, Bleer had a bitchy character. Marge was in the room too. The woman heard a noise outside the door, and coming closer, dispersed all the maids. Adriana did not notice the showdown and turned to her servant again. The worker was scared and expecting to hear another stupidity. After all, Bleer had already asked many strange questions throughout the day. The girl tried to find out everything, including her name and the location of Count Acacia. Marge fearfully assumed that if there was one more stupid argument, the entire empire might start thinking that Bly had gone crazy. Adrian was in a cold sweat and decided to ask if she was Noavian's lover. The servant was unexpectedly happy. She said that she had finally waited for her mistress to decide to admit the truth. The woman suggested that the Archduke was indeed close to Bleer. Adriana asked where such arguments came from. Marge said that the lady was constantly interested in Noavian. Only a mistress could do that. The servant reminded her that over the past year, the lady had received many gifts from Mr. Trovic. The woman suggested that she stop hiding and start speaking frankly. The worker asked to hear the truth. After all, before the transformation, Bleer and the maid were most likely close people. Adriana did not react in any way, but only thought about everything. The girl realized that since the servant did not know the whole truth, no one else could tell anything in more detail. She put the newspaper down and stood up from her chair. Bleer said that she decided to go to the funeral. The heroine wanted to meet Noavian and try to find out everything. Soon it was time to get ready. The girl dressed traditionally, a black dress, and a cape of the same color. Adriana noticed how tense the servants were when they were around. Most likely, Bleer was an evil madam. The blue-haired maid couldn't stand her mistress's gaze. She tried to hide her fear and therefore lowered her eyes. Marge appeared. The servant reported that the carriage was ready to leave and they needed to speed up. After some time, the heroine was driving through the forest. The girl could not realize how similar her appearance was to her previous body. Adriana looked out the window, finally getting the chance to see nature in a way other than a painting after a long time. She was glad that her health was excellent. The girl was a little amused that Bleiter was Noavian's lover. The heroine guessed that the lovers could have had more than just a close relationship. Adriana couldn't believe it, because her husband simply didn't have time for dates due to his constant work. The heroine decided to find out what exactly connected Noavian with Bleer. There was very little time left until the burial place. A huge crowd gathered around the coffin. All the people were upset, or at least pretended to be, and wished peace to the deceased. Adriana wondered if she had been a good person during her life. After all, the heroine had married the first person she met and lived her entire life in a palace. Some people were already leaving. Bleer was surprised that everyone was crying, as if they had personally known the Archduchess. The heroine didn't want to believe it. Most likely, many were just pretending to be upset. The coffin contained the cooled body of the Archduchess, dressed in beautiful clothes. It reminded Hadrian of the funeral of Empress Retina, who also died young. Blee came closer. She began to understand that her past life was already behind her, and calling herself Mrs. Trevica was illogical. Behind them, people announced that Noavian himself had arrived. Everyone dispersed so as not to disturb the Archduke. The girl noticed Mr. Trovic. The guy was quickly approaching the coffin, despite his fatigue. When he approached, the heroine saw Noavian's emotions. His face was pale, and his eyes were holding back tears. The guy couldn't stand it and started crying anyway. It was painful for Adriana to realize that she simply couldn't tell the truth. Bly decided to somehow start a conversation, but Noavian ignored her and ran to the grave. The Archduke fell to his knees. The boy's hands were shaking. The husband most likely loved Adriana, since he was crying so much. The people came back to the dead woman. Noavian's screams and cries could be heard throughout the cemetery. Ariana's brother came closer with his wife. The newlyweds were upset about the loss of their relative. The boy ran to the grave. He begged the gods to save his sister. The wife tried to calm her lover. The Archduke and his brother-in-law were kneeling. People were slowly coming back to salute Adriana. The heroine had no choice but to leave silently. The girl wanted her relatives to call her by that name, and not her lifeless body. Adriana knew that this would never happen again. She had to leave her past life behind. Night fell. People had all gone. The cemetery was silent, and behind one of the trees stood Bleer. The heroine hoped that she had not stayed there in vain. There was a chance that Noavian would decide to return to the grave in order to be alone. The girl prayed that her husband would come. On the grave was written the name, Adriana Svan Trawica, and the status, Mistress of the Northern Territory of Trawica. Bly heard some rustling. Although she was scared, she had to see what was going on there. A horse appeared near the fence. Judging by its figure, the rider was a strong man. The stranger jumped off the animal. A guard approached him. So he was some kind of aristocrat. Adriana, because of the darkness, could not understand who was standing there. The boy came out into the moonlight. A beautiful white suit with stripes visible on the shoulders. His hair was bright white, definitely not Noavian. Blee carefully peered out from behind the tree. The girl became curious about what kind of stranger decided to come to her grave. That guy decided to look back. When he raised his head, the heroine noticed bright red eyes that were slightly glittering from the light. The blonde finally noticed Adriana's grave. He quickly ran towards the monument. The stranger fell to his knees. The guy's whole body was shaking. Since there was silence, bitter crying could be heard. Adriana came out from behind the tree. The heroine was wondering why someone would come to a grave at night and cry like that. The guy couldn't calm down. Bly understood that most likely the stranger knew her in a past life, but she simply couldn't tell the truth. The heroine decided not to communicate with the stranger because she did not know what kind of relationship the previous owner of the body had with the white-haired man. The Countess wanted to quietly leave through the main entrance. The guy suddenly called Madame by her name, Adriana. Bleer was scared, but wanted to examine him. The stranger was in tears. The fair-haired man called the Countess Archduchess again. The guy rose to his feet very slowly. He wanted to run towards Adriana, but something was stopping him from walking. The stranger's body was completely covered in blood. The poor guy was clearly in pain doing anything. While the boy was distracted by his wounds, Bly quickened her pace. She didn't want to talk to anyone, especially at night in a cemetery. The blonde man tried to convince Adriana to stop, but the heroine only began to run faster. Soon, Bleer arrived at the mansion on her own 2 feet. The servants were shocked to see the state of their mistress. The girl told everyone that she was simply in a hurry to get home. From her knee to her toes, her skin was covered in abrasions and wounds. She had lost her heels at the cemetery entrance. Marge ordered Jonah to treat Madame's feet. The little one obviously didn't argue and quickly inspected the condition of the skin with her eyes. The girl sat on her knees and carefully cleaned all the wounds. Adrian felt tired only when she crossed the threshold of the mansion. Iona collected all the dirt and blood with a cotton swab. The lady tried not to move so as not to disturb the maid. Adriana had a headache. The girl had many questions, especially she wanted to understand what kind of man came to the grave. The heroine recalled the image of the stranger. The white-haired man's tears flowed like a stream when Bleer ran away from the cemetery. The girl was upset because, if it weren't for that madman, she would have had the opportunity to see Noavian. Marge sat down next to him. The woman brought tea. The servant was curious to know if the Countess had seen the Archduke. Bly replied that they had crossed paths. But she decided not to specify that they had not spoken or even looked at each other. It seemed to the heroine that she and her husband were in different worlds and nothing could be changed. So the girl had to hide in the cemetery and just cry. She felt sorry for Noavian because the guy had experienced the loss of his beloved. Adriana was ashamed that she dared to doubt her husband's love. The brunette clutched the edge of her dress and tried to figure out what to do next. Marge asked if the lady had seen the body of the Archduchess. The heroine remembered the face of the deceased and was surprised by the beauty of her former appearance. Bleer understood that it was no longer possible to return and become Adriana. Noavian, according to the old tradition, had to spend 100 days mourning for the deceased in order to fulfill the duty of the imperial family. The girl thought this situation was funny. After all, the guy would have to suffer and mourn his beloved, who was actually alive. Marge noticed Blee's emotions and was surprised, because she could not believe that the lady was crying because of the funeral. Adriana returned to reality. She examined her palms. The heroine received a healthy body, but in exchange she lost everything. The servant decided not to disturb and left the Countess alone. Bleer hid her face with her hands and hoped that it would all be just a dream. At that moment, A stranger approached the mansion. His hair did not resemble Noevian or the guy from the cemetery. One of the maids came into the room. The girl said that something important had happened. Iona had already finished the procedures with the mistress's legs. Blee was worried and asked what had happened. That worker was scared when she was near the owner. She handed over the note with trembling hands. Adriana recognized Noevian's handwriting. Her husband wrote a request for the Countess to keep her promise. The heroine had seen her lover write many times and was sure that the letter was written by him. But the girl could not understand what exactly needed to be done. The voice of a brown-haired servant was heard behind the door. The maid said that a man had come who wanted to know who had attended the funeral of the Archduchess. The lady asked when the girl had answered. The servant explained that they were not looking specifically for the Countess, but simply for people who had seen Adriana's body. She stated that she had not told anyone anything. Bly decided to go and talk to her in person. Marge suggested sending the man to the reception area since it was getting late, but the lady was against it. The girl specified that it was best for her to communicate with the guest. The heroine went out into the corridor. The Countess ran to the exit and was sure that the man was Noevian. The girl didn't even think about slowing down on the stairs. She hoped that her lover was standing behind the door. Adriana quickly opened the door after going down. It was very bright outside, and the moonlight slightly illuminated the room. But despite the hopes, it was not Noevian who stood behind the door. There stood a guy with red hair, and judging by his outfit, he was an ordinary messenger. After that meeting, 2 workers stood by the carriage and discussed those who had attended the funeral. They remembered Marge, but from the words of the Countess, it turned out that the servant did not see the Highness at the grave. The girl spoke frightened, so the guy did not even doubt the truth of the words. The stranger from the cemetery got out of the carriage. His condition was even worse, and he was already staggering, most likely due to loss of blood. The guards grabbed the master from both sides. One servant said that the master simply liked that girl, and that's why he behaved strangely. The guy with red hair tried to convince her that she shouldn't have approached the Countess because she was scared after what happened at the cemetery. The second guard noted that the gentleman simply saw a ghost, and that was all. The owner was angry because he was sure that he had met Adriana. The first servant apologized and said that they had made a mistake when they tried to express their opinion. The guy admitted that if His Highness saw himself from the outside, he would also be scared. The guard plucked up his courage and clarified that the girl was tense when she saw the master's red eyes. The second servant tried to shut his friend up. The owner decided to agree with the worker's opinion and suggested leaving, but he also stated that the Countess should have been under constant surveillance. His Highness wanted to get into the carriage, but his head suddenly began to hurt, and he fell to the ground. The guards got scared and ran to help. The servant took his master by the arm. He ordered Neil to stay at the mansion and carry out the order to follow. Afterwards, the workers quickly loaded the Highness into the carriage. The coachman hit the horses with his cane to return to the palace as quickly as possible. Neil waited until they left the mansion. The guy should have come up with a good plan to gain the Countess's trust. When the Highness was being seated in the carriage, he began to cry quietly. The guards were surprised to see this and did not even know what to do. The owner of blonde hair and sinister red eyes is the second prince of Rhodenus, the prodigal son of the emperor. The guy did not miss the opportunity to spend the night with any woman, but he was one of the most problematic people in the empire. The father did not particularly love his child, like many others. Rhodenus was born with incredible beauty and a crazy personality. That day, the prince created chaos in the morning, a couple of hours before the trip to the cemetery. In the castle, the guard kept up with the master. He was wondering if everything was really all right. The servant reminded that Rhodenus had been attacked by a monster and that the wounds were serious and needed urgent treatment. The prince assured that everything was fine. He had already approached his room and, without listening to the worker, went inside. Neil decided that it was not worth bothering the master over trifles. Since there were no more matters to deal with, the servant was going to... A loud noise in the prince's room, as if a fight had broken out. The worker went inside and tried to find out what had happened. A frightened girl sat on the floor. Rhodenus held a sword as if he was ready to kill the ill-wisher. Neil recognized the noble's daughter. The lady claimed that she simply wanted to pass on a newspaper. She was flushed and in tears. The prince brought the sword closer and ordered the girl to leave the room quickly. The poor girl had no choice but to obey, but Rhodnus took the newspaper anyway. The guard reminded him that there were bad rumors about the gentleman, and it was better not to fight or kill everyone in a row. The prince replied that he didn't care what people thought. The boy straightened out the paper and began to read the news of the day. Rhodnus was shocked by what she read. The newspaper reported the death of Archduchess Adriana due to a chronic illness. Without thinking twice, the prince went to the cemetery. Neil tried to dissuade the master from going because the wounds could rupture again. The servant was surprised that Rhodnus was crying over the death of some girl. But now the guard's main task was to find out more about a person like Marge. The next day, the usual routine took place in the mansion. The countess gave orders on where to put things. Marge was glad that all the junk had finally been thrown out, because it made the atmosphere much nicer. The heroine guessed that there had been no person who managed the affairs of the house before. The butler came into the room. He asked the lady to help with some documents. The old man clarified that the count had done this before, but since he was away, no one could finish the business. Adriana had enough knowledge to figure it out. Bleer pointed to the lines on the paper and explained the principle of operation. The butler remembered everything. Marge watched and was very pleased with the new behavior of the mistress. The servant ordered the other maids to stop resting and finish setting up the tables quickly. Adriana watched the servants work together and was glad that everyone began to feel more comfortable in the mansion. The girls were carrying a large box. The friends were discussing something heatedly and laughing brightly. The workers lost their fear when the mistress was nearby. The heroine could not imagine her future life. But first, she wanted to improve her relations with the servants. Adriana went outside to be alone with her thoughts. The girl tried to understand what connected Noavian and Bleer. The countess still hasn't thrown away that note. She was very worried about the written words, which at first glance were harmless. The heroine suggested that the couple could have been just close friends. But she immediately denied this, because the husband was always alone. Adriana thought they might be related. But Noavian was a member of the imperial family, which meant that Bleer was also of high status. The girl approached the fountain. She understood that the assumptions sounded stupid, because in that case, it was unlikely that she would have married the old Count Acacia. Adriana hoped that Noavian was just friends with Bleer. The heroine recalled how she decided to read a book in the mansion. Then, Marge was surprised that the lady was reading something other than magazines. The countess noticed that there were many interesting novels in the office. Remembering the servant's reaction, Adriana guessed that the Blairs had never been engaged in reading. The heroine was reassured by that incident. After all, there was little chance that Noavian, the best student at the academy, would communicate with a girl who had never even held a book in her hands. Adriana calmed her laughter. She looked at the new body in the reflection of the water. Holding her cheek, the girl declared that the countess was very beautiful. In some places, the Archduchess and Bleer are quite similar. The heroine decided that the previous owner of the body was very stupid. She understood that it could not go on like this any longer, and it was time to change something. Adrina wanted to understand what promise was being discussed. The girl decided to find Noavian herself and not wait for the guy to contact her. Marge ran to the fountain. The servant said that the master had returned and wanted to see his wife. Adriana was delighted with this news. After all, it was the perfect chance to learn about that promise. The old count came to his room. He stood by the window, waiting for his wife to come and see him. Blee stepped inside and announced her presence. Mr. Acacia immediately turned to the door and was glad to see him. The couple sat down at the table and poured themselves some tea. The husband's mood changed. He wondered if his wife had met Noavian. Bleer replied that she had not yet communicated with the Archduke. The old man asked if Madame planned to keep her promise. Adriana was glad to have found someone who knew something. She asked what exactly her husband was talking about. The count fell to his knees. The old man begged the girl to fulfill her promise because he wanted to die a dignified death. The husband put his hands on the floor. Mr. Acacia was angry that other old people lived a quiet life, and he worked for the Archduke. Blee ordered to calm down and stand up. The old man reminded that Noavian was not merciful. The heroine was frightened that because of one question, her husband began to humiliate himself so much. He was already shaking all over and did not understand what he was saying. Blee tried to explain somehow. The girl clarified that she just wanted to hear her husband's opinion about the promise. The old man grabbed his throat with his hands. He asked again whether he would be able to keep the title if his wife did everything. Adriana was already confused. Mr. Acacia declared that he no longer intended to participate in this stupid performance. The Count regretted agreeing to the marriage. He assumed that Blair did all this only to become Noavian's lawful lover. The heroine froze in place. The girl clenched her fists in anger because she finally began to understand something. She recalled Noavian crying over his wife's dead body, which was most likely a performance in front of the rest of the people. Adriana was upset because it was quite clear that Blair was the Archduke's mistress. The second prince stood in the hallway. It was the royal family's mansion. The boy stopped his relative, Noavian. The Archduke stood up. Rodeness reminded him that they had to hold a useless performance of a victory ceremony. The brunette congratulated His Highness on his latest achievement. The prince asked if he would be at the event. After all, if it weren't for Noavian, the guy would have been defeated on the field. Rodeness said he would have been disappointed if the Archduke had not come to the ceremony. The bleeding had stopped, but the bandages were still dirty. Noavian recalled that he was in mourning. He also had to see his wife off on her final journey. The Archduke bowed and announced that he was about to leave the palace in order to complete his planned business. When the guy had already moved away, Rodeness told him to accept his condolences on the loss of his wife. Noavian stopped, clearly holding back his anger. The prince smiled sarcastically, realizing that he had hurt his relative's feelings. The Archduke turned slowly. He looked at Rodeness and said nothing. The situation in the corridor was only getting more tense, but Noavian did not start a quarrel. The guy bowed and with such a gesture showed that he accepted condolences. The prince watched this and tried to contain his anger. The guard reminded him that the gentleman had already expressed grief over Adriana's death. Rodeness clarified that he had not seen the body in person, so those words could not be counted. Neil assumed that the Archduke was already aware that the prince had visited Adriana's grave. The gentleman replied that he was not at all concerned about the opinion of society. The guard reminded that Noavian had not allowed anyone near his wife's body. Mr. Trovic asked the king not to put Adriana on display. The servant admired such an act, but it could not last long because even Empress Retina went through such a procedure, 100 days of grief. Neil offered to make arrangements so that the prince could formally express his condolences. The gentleman said there was no point in that. Rodeness was sure that the moron would never show his wife's body. According to old tradition, while the procedure was going on, Adriana lay in a glass coffin somewhere in the mansion. The guard wanted to ask more, but the gentleman changed the subject. The guy ordered to send an invitation to the victory ceremony to the Acacia mansion. Neil noted that the Count might not have come, since he was Noavian's vassal. The old man had no opportunity to appear at such events without the owner's permission. Rodeness said the mistress of the house was a young girl, which meant she could have come with her maids. The guard realized that the gentleman wanted to meet with Lady Marge, but the servant could not understand why the prince needed to meet with Count Acacia's employee. Rodeness wasn't about to explain his intentions. The guy clearly had a plan that Neil didn't need to be told about. Several days had passed since that incident. Adriana could not forget how her husband begged her to fulfill that promise. The heroine locked herself in the mansion to recover from the shock. She was hurt by the Count's words about the closeness of Blair and Noavian, even though it was just an assumption. Adriana spent her days in bed. The girl perceived herself as a legal mistress. There was one ridiculous tradition in society, according to which a married man could not have a secret relationship with an unmarried lady. Blee kept thinking about Noavian. She decided to get up and walk a little, to get some fresh air. There was a magazine on the table. The girl noticed it right away and wanted to read it quickly. It was about a ball to celebrate the victory of the second prince. It was also said that the main feature of the ceremony should be trendy brands of dresses and hats to charm Rodeness. Adriana had heard about the guy's escape from the capital. The girl was sure that he would not have arranged such celebrations. There was a knock at the door. Iona quietly entered and said that the dress was ready and had already been delivered. Blair was surprised. The servant reminded her that the suit had been sent back to be remade according to the Countess's instructions. Adriana was not happy with this news. After all, there are already a lot of clothes in the wardrobe, and some of them have never been worn. Iona assumed that the lady wanted to debut in the new season. The heroine did not expect to hear such words. Blee asked why the initiation had not happened earlier. The servant said that she knew nothing and simply repeated the lady's speech. As it turned out, the new body was not 22 years old. The maid said that the Countess was upset about the missed debut. Iona quoted Blier as saying that she was ready to burn down the mansion if something went wrong. This is exactly the statement the girl made to her husband. Adriana was ashamed of such impudence of the previous owner of the body. The heroine guessed that the Countess did not have roots from a noble family. Blier decided to return to the conversation about the dress. She asked where the suit was at that moment. The Countess arrived at the studio with her maids. The girl looked at her newly acquired item. She asked again what emerald was hung. The seller assured that all the jewelry was exclusively S-class. The Countess decided to review the check. The girl did not trust the man at all, and therefore tried to double-check everything. The salesman rejoiced, and was already laughing quietly. After all, before, Blee simply believed on word and always bought everything. Adriana noticed that the order form and the dress did not match, and also, the man chose the most expensive emerald. The Countess was even pleased with how the seller tried not to look like a fraud. Blee wondered how this simple emerald could be S-class. The girl came closer to the dress to make sure. The seller stated that he was only involved in transportation, and therefore did not understand the valuation. The Countess suggested that she explain everything herself. Marge and Iona were surprised, but stood quietly so as not to disturb the lady. Blee approached the salesman. She ordered the man to look up. He was frightened and reluctantly complied. The heroine pointed to her eyes. The girl declared that this was the color of the highest quality emerald. Adriana grew up without a mother. Therefore, from childhood, she learned to pay attention to many things. The servants taught the girl to look carefully to find the highest quality jewelry. One woman said that you had to look at the center of the stone to understand what class it was. The heroine had to prove her worth every day, so she had to put in more effort than the others. The girl refused to believe the seller's words. Adriana was angry that they could sell such horrible things like that. Blier probably asked for the most expensive things and didn't check them. The man suggested that there must have been a mistake and was therefore going to bring another dress. The Countess replied that there was no need to bother. The seller was delighted and breathed a sigh of relief, because he thought that Blier had decided to forgive. The girl said that she would buy the items for the amount that would come out after revaluation. The brunette specified that she was expecting a personal apology from the owner of the studio. The man asked to limit the punishment to him only. The salesman promised to talk to the jeweler and the worker to make a new beautiful dress for the Countess. Blier said she had no complaints about the suit and simply wanted the difference in price back. She said she would continue to do business with Reblea, but that she had lost trust in the atelier. Jonah and Marge admired the lady's courage. The seller had no choice but to agree to those terms. After the servants returned, they discussed what had happened for a long time. The little one laughed, remembering the expression of that worker, but it was necessary to return to work. Iona came to the lady with an offer to return the dress and buy a more luxurious one. Blier said a more elaborate costume could have drawn too much attention. At the ball, it was enough to show off your face. In her past life, few people saw Adriana's image, but some close acquaintances might recognize such behavior. Marge and the servant listened to the lady with concern. Blee was surprised and asked what she had said wrong. Everyone had previously thought that the Countess wanted to be the center of attention, but the maids did not answer questions, but simply stated that they needed to get back to work. The lady already knew what the servants were thinking. Blier decided to change the subject and reminded them about the outfit. The costume was prepared and put on a mannequin. The Countess suggested that the dress was too revealing for a debutante. Iona replied that the style had been chosen to suit the owner's tastes. Blier explained that this way she would be very noticeable and would attract all eyes. But before, the Countess thought it was a sin not to boast of such beauty. The little one remembered those words very well. Adriana was embarrassed and confirmed the servants' arguments. But the heroine had no choice. She had to attend the ceremony to meet Noevian. The lady was sure that this event could be a good chance for a debut. The servant reminded that the event would begin the next day. Blay understood that the deadline was short, but since the dress was ready, it was possible to take a risk. Iona clarified that no one had invited the hostess to the ceremony. Adriana was surprised at how plain the Acacia family was. She had forgotten that she was no longer an archduchess. Bly asked where her husband was. Only the old man could know some way to get there. The maid replied that the gentleman had been in his study the whole time. The heroine ran to her husband's room. She wondered if Mr. Acacia had enough influence to get an invitation to such an important event. The Countess was attracted by Marge's joy. Approaching the balcony, the girl saw the butler and servant. The maid reported that the family had been invited to the victory ceremony. Bly wasn't particularly surprised. She didn't understand why the letter was sent in the middle of the night and on the last day and not in advance. Marge was delighted, because for the first time in 30 years, they had been sent an invitation to such a big celebration. The rest of the servants came to read the letter. Adriana suggested that it could have been written by Noavian himself, but the heroine refused to believe herself. She wanted to hear her husband personally and find out whether Blair was his mistress. The girl was not going to believe the rumors. Noavian and his wife had an excellent relationship, and no society could separate the newlyweds, the Archduchess believed. Time flew by. The ceremony had already begun. Blair and her husband arrived at the mansion, but the Count was very worried and could not calm down. The old man asked again whether he had to go inside. Seeing Blair's gaze, Mr. Acacia immediately changed his mind and obediently announced that he would go to the ceremony. The heroine understood that it was very difficult for the old man, but to appear without a partner would be suspicious and unacceptable. For such a family, an invitation to the ceremony was a great honor. When the couple got into the carriage, the servants went out into the street and supported the lady. The heroine had to find out what she wanted. The girl confidently opened the door and led her husband inside. The servant announced that the Acacia family had arrived, but no one present even looked in their direction. Blair was mentally prepared for the fact that no one cared about the presence of the Countess. The girl looked around the guests, looking for the right people. She asked if the old man was worried. Mr. Acacia replied that if he lost consciousness, his wife should not pay attention and rest peacefully. The wife wanted to calm the Count down, but the servant announced new arrivals. It was important for the girl to see everyone. The worker said that the ruler of the great empire of Ronta and his wife, the Empress, had appeared at the door. Next came the hope of the whole country, His Highness the Crown Prince, together with his beloved. The servant wanted to keep the intrigue going. He announced that the one who had managed to demonstrate the empire's power by defeating the rebels in the west would soon arrive. All the people lost their spirit and turned towards the entrance. The servants loudly said that His Highness the Second Prince had arrived. Rhodanus was calm and did not look towards the nobles. The girls were delighted because they saw the emperor's son for the first time. Some guy tried to calm his friends down. Blair perceived the prince as a psycho. The image of the soldier seemed very familiar to her, as if they had crossed paths before. The heroine remembered the cemetery. The girl assumed that Rhodanus was the man who cried at Adriana's grave. The emperor appeared. The man wished everyone to enjoy the joy of victory. The people shouted glory to the prince and longed for the prosperity of Ronta. Rhodanus looked around at those present. The guy's attention was drawn to our heroine. The first dance was about to begin, and he had to choose a girl. Bly noticed the prince's gaze on her. The countess was a little scared, but tried not to show it. The guy slowly went down to the first floor. He looked at all the guests again, looking for a suitable miss. The countess hid behind her husband. The girl covered her face with a fan so that no one would pay attention to the redness. Rhodanus seemed to be purposefully walking towards Blia. The heroine prayed that the guy would not approach them, but the prince seemed to have heard the countess's request. The soldier invited another girl to dance. The people were surprised and wanted to know what status that miss had. The orchestra began to play a melody. All those who wanted to came to the middle and circled in pairs. Blair was glad that Rhodanus did not recognize her. The old man had already turned pale and could not move, because for the first time he was so close to high-ranking people. The heroine made sure that the man in the cemetery was the prince. While they were dancing, the soldier and the miss found something to talk about. Mr. Acacia felt ill. The countess was not prepared for such an outcome. The leading dance was over, and now everyone was obliged to dance. The old man apologized for ruining the evening. The girl didn't have time to do anything, and he fell towards the floor. The count fell on the carpet. There were a couple of guys nearby, and they immediately ran to help. Blee was scared and tried to do something too. The orchestra did not think of stopping. Most likely, The old man's heart was aching. While he was asking for help, a beautiful melody was playing in the room. The nobles took the count on their backs. The boy said that he had carried the poor fellow to the infirmary. Blear was also going to go to the doctor to look after her husband. The heroine was very worried about her husband. Although she did not love the old man, he was still an old man, and she felt sorry for him. Bly wanted to go to the infirmary. But from behind, Rodenus twisted the girl's arms and did not even give her the opportunity to turn around. The boy pressed the countess closer to him. He declared contentedly that he had finally found what he wanted. Since the dance continued, none of the people even paid attention to what the prince was doing. Bly ordered to let go of her hands. After all, after the end of the song, everyone would look at the couple. The heroine tried to escape herself. The girl could not attract attention before meeting Noevian. Neil approached them. The knight asked why Marge had come to the ball. Blear immediately recognized the guy. The countess looked at Rodenus. The girl guessed that it was the prince who had sent his servant to the mansion. Blee first wanted to break free. She twitched her arms and tried to move away, but the soldier's strong grip prevented her from doing so. The prince noted that the lady might find herself in a difficult situation if everyone saw that the girl was without a partner. Rodenus offered his help. Blear was categorically against it and wanted to end the conversation, because of the guy she could be disgraced in front of the nobles. The heroine wanted the prince to simply disappear. The song ended, and the orchestra had a couple of minutes break. People could notice the couple. Bly agreed to help. The girl asked to let go of her hands first. The prince was pleased with the obedience of the misses. Rodenus loosened his grip and stepped back a little. The countess breathed a sigh of relief and was already thinking about what she should do next. The guests saw the prince standing next to the girl. Someone suggested that the hero of the empire had chosen his next dance partner. The prince walked around the countess and stood in front of her. The girl could not imagine how she should react. Rodenus asked Blear to dance. The guy's face was very calm and happy, as if nothing had happened. The heroine was afraid to agree. People whispered and did not understand why the lady was in no hurry to respond to the proposal. Blee reached out her hand and took hold of the prince. She wanted to finish everything quickly so as not to attract more attention. The following melody spread through the hall. A couple stood by the fountain and slowly twirled to the rhythm. The conductor led the orchestra. The workers had time to rest and therefore played their instruments without much effort. The heroine did not understand how the prince could know Adriana. It was a mystery to her why the soldier came to the cemetery. Blee was very nervous. The girl had a feeling that Noevian was among the crowd. The prince wanted to tell Mrs. some unnecessary information. He noted that he had danced his first dance with a similar lady at that place. Rodenus addressed his companion as Countess Acacia. The boy thanked Blear for being able to recall those memories. The soldier knew from the start that it wasn't Marge's servant standing in front of him. The heroine had even more questions about the first dance. In her entire past life, Adriana danced in that hall only once, at her debut at the age of 22. It was then the day of the masquerade, which was obligatory every year. Naturally, the girl adhered to the traditions and was dressed appropriately. During the whole evening, only her brother and Noevian danced with the heroine. She thoroughly enjoyed that event. Blee couldn't forget the prince's words about a similar person. The girl thought about everything and tried to adjust to the rhythm of her partner. While the couple was spinning, a man was watching from the balcony. The music was drawing to a close. The countess was spinning around with Rodenus. When the girl turned around, she was able to look higher and noticed the man. Looking closer, Adriana recognized her husband. Noevian showed no emotion, as if he didn't care who Blear was dancing with. The orchestra began to play louder. The workers sped up to match the conductor's movements. The countess moved away from her partner a little, but the prince continued to hold her. The girl wanted to meet Noevian at any cost. Rodenus tried to stop Mrs. But the heroine did not pay attention to the words. The brunette only watched her lover to see where the guy would go. Bly ran out of the room. The girl could not afford to miss the chance. She wanted to hear the truth. The countess went out into the corridor and looked around. It seemed to Adriana that Noevian had gone towards the far door. Blee was about to run further, but the feeling that someone was behind her did not give her peace. The girl screamed in pain. Strong male hands grabbed the fragile body of the madame and pressed her against the wall. It was Noevian. The guy asked how long Blear was going to tease him. The heroine was very scared by such rudeness. The Archduke pressed closer. Adriana remembered that she was not a countess. She hoped that her husband would be able to guess this. Noavian smelled of alcohol, which was not natural. The guy asked why Bly was silent. The heroine was frightened and did not even know what to say. The Archduke reminded her of the old promise. Adriana trembled even more. All the questions she wanted to ask her husband were simply forgotten. The girl tried to remember. The brunette wanted to find out if the countess was Noavian's lover. Bleer asked what promise was in question. The Archduke had not expected to hear such a question. There was disappointment in the guy's voice. Noavian reminded them that the couple had made this vow to each other last year. He exhaled, and the smell of strong alcohol came from his mouth. The Archduke loosened his grip and remarked that he did not want to remember Adriana's death. Blay took hold of her wrists, which were hurting badly. The girl saw how upset Noavian was about the loss of his wife. The Countess felt as if her heart was about to burst from worry. She asked to be reminded of the essence of the promise. The heroine understood that another incident might not happen again. The girl noted that she wanted to make sure that there were no misunderstandings between them. Noavian turned away. Mr. Trovic hesitated. The guy was clearly worried and simply didn't know how to start a conversation. The Archduke gathered his strength and reminded that in the event of Adriana's death, Bleer was to become her mistress. For the heroine, such a statement was a real pain. Such tonight, Noavian said that after his wife's death, he planned to commit suicide in order to meet his beloved. But remembering Adriana, he realized that his beloved would not want her husband to live such a life. The Archduke said that he thought of Bleer at that moment. After all, when a guy looks at the Countess, then Noavian grabbed his hair, ready to pull it out. The lover admitted that when he saw Mrs. Acacia, he remembered Adriana. The Archduke admitted that being around the Countess was very difficult, but it was painful even when his wife was alive. Noavian said that it was unbearable to see Adriana suffer all the time. He asked if the Countess understood these feelings. Blee did not answer. The heroine saw for the first time that a person could suffer so much for others that he thought about his own death. For Adriana, the most painful memory was seeing her husband crying at her grave. But the Countess did not understand why Noavian needed a mistress, since he loved his beloved so much. Bleer assumed that the Archduke wanted to spend the night with her. The girl hoped that her husband would refuse this. For the heroine, the only man she could rely on in that mansion was Noavian. She wished that Mr. Trovic did not want to be with the Countess. The Archduke laughed and declared that he was not such a bastard. The girl breathed a sigh of relief and thought that her lover had refused in this way. Noavian took hold of Madame's cheek. He clarified that it was all a lie, and that at that moment he wanted to spend the night with the Countess. The guy noticed that he wanted Blia more than Adriana. The couple began a passionate kiss. The heroine could not hold back her tears. The poor girl got this passion she always wanted for the first time. The girl did not resist in any way due to her state of shock. Blee placed her hand on her lover's torso. Adriana had always dreamed of feeling such an embrace. For the heroine, all this was disgusting. Her heart simply could not stand it all. Therefore, the girl pushed her lover away from herself. Noavian wanted to ask something, but the Countess ordered him to move away. The brunette did not want to look at the guy and decided to look around. What she saw in the shadows frightened the poor girl greatly. The girl tried to say something, but could not utter a word. All this time, the couple was being watched by Rodness. The guy's eyes were burning with anger, as if he was ready to kill the Archduke. Blee ran outside. The girl decided to hide in the garden and be alone to calm down. The Countess slowly came to her senses. She did not understand what the second prince was doing there. The poor fellow's cheeks were still red. The heroine remembered those red eyes of Rodness. It seemed to the girl that such a piercing gaze saw through everything. Adriana understood that the prince had seen everything. Madame did not want to look at him and therefore decided to run away. Bleer had to return to the ball quickly, but the poor fellow had no strength left to hold back his tears. The Countess was shaking all over. The girl was constantly crying and didn't even know what was causing such emotions. Adriana noticed she had lost her shoe as she ran away. Marge insisted that she just walk slowly. Rodness came out of the bushes. The girl immediately noticed the prince and was afraid to say anything. Blee stood on the ground for decency's sake. The prince assumed that Mrs. Acacia needed help. Madame categorically refused. Neil followed suit. The guard handed his master some black thing that looked like shoes. Adriana was very familiar with the thing. Looking closely, the girl recognized her shoe. Bly remembered that these were the very shoes she had lost when she had fled the cemetery from Rhodeness. The prince came closer. The guy noticed that Countess Acacia clearly needed help. Adriana was annoyed that he made such a face as if he understood everything. With trembling hands, the girl reached for her shoe and immediately thanked him. Bly quickly put on her shoes. There was an awkward silence between the couple. The prince waited for the lady to be ready to continue the conversation. But the countess did not want to talk any further and said that she was going to leave. Rhodeness suggested that it was time to finally introduce themselves formally to each other. Bly hesitated and had no idea what to answer. The heroine did not understand why the second prince wanted to get acquainted, because he already knew everything about her. The girl decided to tell it like it was, namely that she was Noavian Trovik's lover. The countess specified that she wanted to stop being like that. The brunette asked if there was any way she could help. Rhodeness came closer. The boy suggested that in this case there was an option to try to fix everything. The prince recalled his question about the offer of help. The heroine raised her head and saw his calm eyes. Soon Bleer returned to the mansion. The servants tried to talk to Madame, as they were very worried about the poor man's appearance. Iona and her friend stood at the door. The workers wanted to shout to the mistress and find out what happened at the ball. Adriana was lying on the bed. The girl couldn't even change her clothes. She didn't react to the servants and was lost in her thoughts. Returning home, Madame could not stop crying all the way. So the coachman listened to his mistress's crying. Iona asked if Blieri had fallen ill. Adriana wanted to be alone and simply not answer anyone. The girl recalled Noavian's words, how he said that he suffered because of the pain of his loved one. The heroine couldn't understand those emotions, so she decided to remain silent. The poor thing started crying quietly again. Adriana wanted to hear an honest confession of feelings, and not the Archduke's complaints about fatigue and pain. The girl threw her shoes on the floor. She wanted Noavian to just say how much he loved his wife, and not hug this Blye. The heroine thought about starting a relationship with her lover in the role of this countess, and hiding in the shadows in order to live a peaceful life with a feeling of pain. Bleer guessed that Rhodes could know about all her circumstances, as if he understood who was in the Madame's body. Then, the girl asked how exactly the prince could help. The soldier clarified that he did not intend to get involved in lovers' quarrels. Rhodeness suggested that Bleischer come up with what she wanted, so that the next meeting would have a clear dialogue without awkward pauses. The heroine did not understand why the prince needed this. The girl was interested in what he would ask in return after the help was rendered. The next morning, the countess had to go outside. Iona, during the procedures, asked if Madame had eaten normally at the ball. The servant reminded her that the mistress did not tolerate alcohol well, which was why she was so worried. Blia felt awkward with such questions. Adriana noticed that her skin and clothes were clean. The little one had obviously taken care of everything. The mistress was grateful to her worker. The heroine took the newspaper. While reading, the girl wanted to think about what was happening and decide what needed to be done next. On one of the pages, there was an advert from a lawyer who was ready to help get alimony. This statement attracted the countess. Adriana came up with a plan. First, she had to break up with Mr. Acacia and then, using the money she got, leave the city. Madame went to the bookcase. She wanted to try to find something useful and interesting. The girl's attention was drawn to one piece of writing, where on the cover it was written, "All about divorces." Blee wanted to take it, but accidentally caught another book, and it fell to the floor. Iona closed her eyes and said that she saw nothing. The servant said that it was the mistress's diary. The little one noticed that everything written inside was in a foreign language, but at the same time the mistress carefully hid her work from everyone. For the heroine, this was a real find. After all, the girl had the opportunity to learn all the secrets about the life of Blee Acacia. But when she opened the diary, Adriana was disappointed. After all, the book was written in the Elicorn language, which the Archduchess hated more than anything else in the world. Lunch came. Blee decided to start a conversation about the divorce in the near future. The old man choked on his food. The count wiped his mouth, and his joyful smile appeared. The gentleman ordered the butler to bring that thing. Mr. Akatsi handed his wife the documents. The lawyer had long since prepared the divorce agreement. Even the paper had become worn out. Blee wanted to double-check the contents. The girl quickly read everything and noticed that there was no clause about monetary compensation. The old man did not understand what the lady was talking about. The wife explained that in case of divorce, funds are needed to start a new life. Mr. Acacia had no choice. The count was nervous and asked how much Bleer wanted to receive. The girl noted that since the marriage was ordered by the Archduke, the dowry should be quite large. The old man understood Bleer's wish. He extended his hand and showed on his fingers the amount he was prepared to pay. The girl was silent, expecting more acceptable payments. Mr. Acacia guessed what his wife wanted, and although his palm was shaking, he offered more money. Bleer told the old man to remember the benefit he would receive after the divorce. The count did not understand what Madame meant. Adriana wanted to know what reward Noavian had promised Mr. Acacia. The girl assumed that, most likely, he would finally get a rest and a well-deserved pension. The heroine thought that the old man was very petty for a man who expected a bonus from the gentleman. Blee extended her hand and indicated a sum much larger than her husband had offered. Mr. Acacia was not pleased to see the girl's desire, but he had no choice and had to agree to such conditions. Bleer signed the contract, which was amended. The ex-wife asked whether she could have used the title Countess at the reception with the Archduke. The old man was happy as a child and did not object to the Madame's request. The heroine was glad that she had made the first decision in favor of Noavian. Adriana wanted to focus on her new life, forget about revenge and grievances, and try to enjoy the possibilities of this body. The heroine clearly decided that she would say goodbye to Noavian, who considered Bleer his property. The Countess had to go back to reading her diary. The girl hated the Alecon language, and therefore had to study it again from books. Adriana couldn't remember anything they taught about this topic at the academy. Madame couldn't even read a few words. The diary most likely described Bleer's relationship with Noavian, which our heroine really needed to know. The Countess did not want to take a translator and planned to learn just the basics so she could read it herself. Iona came into the room and suggested that the lady take a break. Blee put the book aside and asked the servant whether Ella Kanaski's teacher had written a reply letter. The servants assured that the man would soon appear. The lady was not pleased with such news because she wanted to read the diary as quickly as possible. The girl decided to rest and drink hot tea. Iona asked if the Archduke had sent any letter. The Countess remembered the messages from Noavian. They had been delivered that morning, and the heroine had not planned to read the contents. But it was unacceptable to do so, and Bleer had to read the letter. In addition, the guy sent a dress. The girl took the invitations. She looked at the initials of her lover and still could not bring herself to open the envelope. Iona was very interested to know what was in the letter, but the servant did not want to impose and said that she would return to her duties. Bleer began to read the contents. Noavian had written that the Countess was invited to a banquet on the occasion of Archduchess Adriana Treweika's birthday. The girl laughed out of worry. He clarified that at the funeral, everyone wanted to gather and fully honor his wife. Noavian wrote at the end with a request that Bleer come and dedicate the evening to the memory of Archduchess Treweik. Adriana was angry that the invitation became more absurd with each line. The vassals were obliged to attend such an event, but the count disappeared as soon as he saw the invitation. Normal people wouldn't want to draw attention to this event, but Noavian probably enjoyed it. It was as if the Archduke loved to create and spread such rumors, so that he could then listen to the discussions of the rest of the nobles. Blee could already imagine these conversations, how people would assume that Noavian had gone mad after his wife's death. The girl suspected that the banquet was not organized to honor Adriana, but to meet the Countess. The heroine decided that it didn't matter what Noavian's intentions were. In any case, she was obliged to appear there. Time passed quickly, and the banquet had already begun. Many people were dressed in black suits, like at a funeral. Iona was worried about her mistress and tried to persuade her to at least wear a shawl so as not to look too vulgar. But Blee didn't care. The girl wore a rather bright and revealing dress, despite the occasion of the banquet. The invitation was clearly about a birthday, so no specific dress code was specified. The Countess felt uncomfortable being surrounded by people. Madame planned to hide and stay in some quiet place. But Noavian managed to notice his mistress. The guy noticed that the wife of his faithful vassal had arrived, but no one bothered to introduce Countess Acacia to the people. The heroine did not understand how the Archduke could be so terrible. He sent away such a gorgeous dress and deceived Bleer, saying that it was a birthday banquet. The girl was very worried and noted that she expected to see a different atmosphere, since the letter spoke about a holiday, not a funeral. Noavian clarified that the Countess was simply not accustomed to the capital's social life. The guy suggested going into another room to give the guest some suitable clothes from Adriana's wardrobe. Bleer guessed that this was a trick to get some privacy, but the Countess decided to agree. The owner of the house led her towards the door. When the Mei reached the exit, Noavian called the butler to him. The servant obediently and quickly came. The master ordered to take care of Countess Acacia. The worker mockingly noted that he would carry out the task. The heroine recognized the servant. The guy never defended Adriana, but liked to watch from the side. Butler of the Trovic mansion, Gaspar. The servant suggested that Madame quickly go to another room. The worker led Bleer to the sofa. He asked the Countess to wait a little while until the gentleman was free. When Gaspar left, Bleer was able to relax and lie on the pillows for a while. Everything that was happening was really exhausting the girl, but the Countess understood that there was no time to rest. She remembered her room from her past life very well. Adriana kept the jewelry in the bedroom that she brought from her parents' house. Bly lifted her dress, and despite her heels, ran to the pedestals. The heroine needed to act quickly while she was alone. The girl grabbed the handle and was already in anticipation of things. She decided on such radical actions, and therefore was obliged to take everything that could help. But when I opened the top shelf, I discovered that the box was empty. The necklace I had inherited and other jewelry were gone. Adriana was sure that after her own death, the maids took advantage of the moment and stole everything. But there was no time to be upset. Bleer decided to take the remaining jewelry. The girl was shaking very much because she was a thief, despite the fact that these things were originally hers. Two guys walked into the room. The butler was holding black clothes in his hands. Noavian himself followed. Luckily, Adriana managed to sit down. So that no one would notice her fear, Madame covered her face with a fan. Noavian asked to give the clothes. The butler obeyed and handed over the thing. The master ordered to greet the guests. Gaspar did not hesitate and immediately left the room, saying that everything would go well. The heroine was afraid to be alone with Noavian, but there was no choice. Bly stood with her back to her lover. The Archduke carefully and slowly put a black cape on the girl. Noavian hugged the Countess sharply and tightly. The guy repeated the guest's name quite loudly several times. The heroine began to believe that Bleer really was her husband's mistress. She wondered why the Archduke was doing all this. The guy had never hugged Adriana so tightly. The girl asked why Noavian had written in the letter that the banquet was in honor of a birthday, and in addition, sent such a bright dress. The Archduke noted that his wife had actually been born that day. Bleer held back her tears, because it would have seemed strange to cry at such a moment. The girl pulled away from the embrace. She asked why the sign in the hall said it was a memorial banquet. Noavian explained that if he had thrown a party in honor of the deceased Adriana's birthday, everyone would have thought that the guy had gone crazy. The Archduke wanted to have fun, just the two of them. He grabbed his mistress by the hands and took off that cape. Bleer tried to stop it. After all, if Noavian continued, he could see the jewels that the girl took. The mistress asked to move to the Archduchess's room. She specified that she would soon be living there and wanted to see everything. The Countess noted that she wanted to engage in carnal pleasures in the bedroom. Noavian listened to the girl and took off the straps of her dress. The couple came to Adriana's room. The guy sat down on the bed. Bly asked to look at the chest of drawers. He did not object. The heroine wondered what the real owner of the body would say at that moment. She had to say something a little stupid. Bleer said that all noble ladies kept their favorite jewelry in their bedroom. The girl assumed that the Archduchess did not adhere to such traditions. The Countess clarified that she expected to see a pile of gold, but the cabinet was completely empty. Noavian clearly didn't expect to hear that. The guy got out of bed and assumed that Madame simply didn't notice. The Archduke himself opened the cabinet and found that the box was empty. He was angry and wanted to find Gaspar. All the maids were gathered together, and the girls had to come to the bedroom. On the way, they discussed Noavian's mistress. When the servants entered, they were taken aback. When they saw Bleer, the workers thought it was Mrs. Adriana. The butler asked his friends to be quiet. The head maid wanted to understand how the Countess could be so similar to the Archduchess. The girl recalled how rudely she treated her sick mistress. She had a feeling that something bad would happen. The workers bowed before the chief. Gaspar announced that he had gathered everyone as soon as Noavian gave the order. The Archduke asked who dared to touch Adriana's jewels. The guy suggested that there was a rat in the mansion. Gaspar tried to argue. He insisted that they had already searched the maids' rooms, but had found none of the deceased's belongings. Blé replied that there were places that they had not thought to look at. The girl ordered that the clothes of all workers be inspected. The butler explained that at that moment everyone was watching, and it would be better to conduct a detailed search separately, and Noavian interrupted and stated that he had no intention of taking into account the circumstances of those rats. Gaspar did not argue with the gentleman. The guy said that he would try to conduct the search as quickly as possible. The maids were shaking because of what was happening. The butler was interested in this. He was surprised that the events were becoming more intense and interesting than he had imagined. The servants hid behind the bravest maid. The girls hoped for farewells because they were afraid of being fired. Annie wanted to understand what was so special about that countess that the gentleman behaved so irritably. The maids and Gaspard were about to leave. But Blier asked how they could catch the rat if they trusted another traitor to search. The countess suggested that she examine everything herself. The girl spoke very confidently and mockingly towards the workers. The heroine wanted to take revenge for the bullying in her past life. Gaspar wanted to convince the master to abandon such an idea. Novian grabbed his head, trying to contain his anger. The boy ordered the butler to conduct a search. Blee did not resist, although she was upset that she could not personally inspect the servants. Adriana went for a walk down the hallway. The girl wanted to find out where the most important and precious pendant had gone. It was the only thing that my mother was able to keep. It also contained a portrait of the parent herself. Blee was going to find the pendant by any means necessary. After all, it was unknown when the heroine might have a chance to come to the mansion. The countess entered the hall. The other servants were not aware of the theft and therefore continued their work calmly. Adriana examined all the workers. The girl wanted to find out if there was someone among them who could try to steal her mother's pendant. The maids had the usual routine. Everyone was talking about everything, and the head servant was unhappy about it. Bly planned to find that thing in secret from Noavian, even if she had to pay later. The heroine carefully examined the servants' necks, trying to figure out who might have worn or been fond of jewelry. The countess understood that the servants might not use accessories. The girl was about to go on looking, but someone's voice was heard from behind. The servant grabbed Bleer by the arm. The worker wanted to find out who this madam was and why she was wearing such an expensive outfit. The maid explained that it was not possible to enter the room looking like that. She fell silent when she saw the countess's face. The girl haltingly called the stranger Madam. Bleer interrupted and explained that she was not Adriana. The servant trembled. She thought the Archduchess was alive. Other workers came to the noise. All the maids saw Bleer as their dead mistress. For the heroine, these whispers and the familiar surroundings caused discomfort. The countess wanted to leave the hall as quickly as possible. While the girl was walking, servants were standing around. The workers were discussing how much the madame resembled Adriana. Blee was scared, and not only her hands, but her whole body was shaking. She tried to calm down, but it was very difficult. The heroine convinced herself that she was no longer Adriana. The countess ordered the servants to disperse. The servants called their friends. More and more workers learned that there was a madam in the mansion who looked like the deceased mistress. Blee wanted to order everyone to be quiet because she did not want to remember how much more helpless she was in her past life. But the girl was very worried, which made her overall condition noticeably worse. The countess could not bear the moral burden and fell to the floor. The servants were frightened and immediately ran to help. Everyone was running and trying to find a doctor. The heroine remembered her last day in that life, which began exactly the same way. Then, Adriana tried to get out of that state, but no one tried to help. Naturally, the servants did their job and brought medicine, but it was just work. Blee asked people to pull her out of the sea of death. A very familiar voice answered this cry. Rodness was nearby. The guy took the countess by the hand and was already dragging her back to real life. The girl woke up in the same room, as if nothing had happened. The prince was standing next to her and holding her. Ariadne held on to the poor man's hands. Bleer was surprised that this particular man would be there at such a moment. The countess felt uneasy about such closeness and therefore turned away from her savior. The guy was also worried and was afraid to touch her again. The servants bowed before a man of such rank. The prince noted that Noavian did not know how to treat his guests. The guy took off his jacket. He was quite angry and ordered the servants to inform the Archduke that the star of the empire had arrived. The prince specified that Noavian was obliged to show himself and show respect. The white-haired man covered Bleer with his clothes. Rodness calmed down a little and asked the countess what her condition was. The girl was pleased with such care. The prince recalled his words about help. The boy was still waiting for Bleer to state his request. The servants returned to work, and some went to Noavian to deliver the order from Rodness. The countess replied that she had not forgotten about the contract. The heroine was curious as to why His Majesty was so concerned. The girl assumed that the hero of the empire wanted to apologize for some past mistakes or quarrels. Blythe thought that she might just like the soldier, but she quickly changed her mind, because she thought that was impossible. The countess became interested in whether a woman who wanted to end her life as a mistress could be openly present at all sorts of events. In any case, the heroine understood that there could be no help without a reason. The prince was clearly up to something or doing a favor for Blia. The couple were chatting about everything. At that moment, another voice was heard in the corridor, addressing Mrs. Acacia. Adriana immediately realized that the man was Noavian. The boy was already aware of the maid's disrespect for the countess. The Archduke asked if everything was all right with Bleer. He did not pay any attention to the prince. Rodness stood closer to the countess. The boy looked angrily at his relative, waiting for a greeting. Adriana saw the displeasure of both boys. She was scared because she couldn't imagine how this conversation would end. Adriana and Ionia went outside because they were going to go home. The little one was very worried about her appearance and tried to justify herself somehow. Bleer assured that everything was fine and that the servant should go first to the carriage. The girl wanted to walk alone. The maid asked Madame not to linger too long. After that meeting in the corridor, a dialogue with boring arguments began between the guys. In the end, the second prince left with Noavian. The heroine did not know what to do in such a situation. Blee was upset that she couldn't return the pendant to her mother, but the girl consoled herself with the fact that she managed to take some jewelry from the box. Adriana was distracted from her thoughts by a conversation behind the carriage. The countess carefully approached the carriage and wanted to see who was standing there. Noavian said he didn't like to put his dead wife on display. Rodness insisted he hadn't come for the girl's body. The prince noted that he was going to check one thing. The guy spoke quite confidently and even rudely. Noavian had no intention of softening his tone in his dialogue with his guest. He stated that he had not sent an invitation to his relative. Iona appeared from behind and asked what the lady was doing. Blee asked the little one to be quiet and then quietly go to the carriage. The servant quickly understood and obeyed. Rodness said that he could not explain his presence at this banquet. The Archduke assumed that it was difficult for his relative to talk, since the guy was standing in front of the husband of his first love in his youth. Rodness was not pleased with such impudence of the ill-wisher, but most likely he was right. Noavian guessed that the prince was offended. He asked again if the boy wanted to see the corpse of his first love. The white-haired man stated that he was the first to meet Adriana, and that he initially showed feelings for the girl. The Archduke replied that it did not matter, since the deceased had decided to become Mrs. Trevica anyway. Noavian explained that Adriana wanted to be with a grown man, not a problem boy. The boy took hold of his relative's shoulder. He noted that the prince should not waste time on something that no longer existed. Noavian saw Rodness's irritation. The master of the house declared that it was necessary to return to the mansion in order to see everyone off. The Archduke went inside. He had to pass by the carriage where Adriana was still standing. The guy approached his lover. Blee was scared and did not dare to move away. Noavian wanted to talk to the girl. Adriana did not react to the words, but tried to understand how she could be the first love of the second prince. The heroine wanted to find out what kind of relationship she had with Rodness. For some reason, the Archduchess did not remember that guy at all. Noavian asked Bleer to stop thinking about something else. The lover pressed closer and took hold of the brunette's body. The Archduke grabbed the girl's face. He wondered what exactly the servants in the mansion had said. Blai pushed Novian's hands away. The boy guessed that the missus was not going to answer. The lover was persistent and asked again what the maids had done. The countess stubbornly said that nothing had happened. Noevian was easily angered. Mr. Trewick had already ordered the girl to tell everything and not to test his patience. Bleer explained that if she told everything, the servants would start to despise everyone. The heroine decided to tell that the maids behaved very arrogantly and disgustingly. Adriana was upset that even after her rebirth, she remained a nobody in her husband's house. She wanted to find out everything, so she had to silently accept all the hatred of the workers. Bleer said that it was unpleasant to be there, and it was better to go home. Noevian tried to stop her and replied that he would send knights to the girl as a guard. Rodnus intervened in the conversation. The guy stated that he would rather see the lady off himself and let the host of the banquet continue to protect the mansion. The couple set off home. Since it was evening, it quickly became dark, and the forest became silent as night. Only the sound of hooves could be heard along the path. Blai didn't understand one thing: why the prince decided to come to the banquet. After all, the guy was known for not attending such events. Adriana did not remember ever seeing Rodnus. Madame decided that the soldier had come to see the corpse. The countess wanted to talk to her fellow traveler. The girl thanked the prince for his help. He asked again what exactly he had done. Bleer reminded her that Rodnus had saved her from a crowd of maids. The boy asked why the poor thing was in such a state at that moment. The heroine felt sick because of the memories of her own death. Adriana could not say this and therefore remained silent. Rodnus didn't ask for the truth. The boy turned towards the window to enjoy the night forest. Blee was surprised at how brazen and impudent Noevian was at that moment with his relative. The girl recalled the words of Rodnus, how he stated that Adriana was his first love back in the academy. The countess could not believe that she had managed to forget such a bright personality. Seeing the prince's gaze, she blushed even more. Rodnus asked if Bleer had heard his conversation with the Archduke. The girl admitted that she had eavesdropped a little. The prince said that then it was time to start a more serious conversation. The soldier said that he planned to cooperate with the countess. Rodnus asked if the girl had thought of where exactly she needed help. Bleer wanted to know how much such services cost. The heroine understood that cooperating with such a person gives a great chance to achieve all goals. Mrs. Acacia said that she planned to divorce her husband and get rid of Noevian's influence. The prince asked what the essence of such actions was. Bleer admitted that she did not want to live as a mistress, but to finally see the sadness of the Archduke. The girl clarified that she was going to dissolve her marriage with Count Acacia, then gain Noevian's trust and betray him at the most inopportune moment. Rodnus offered to help with the divorce. After all, if a direct relative of the emperor approved it, then the trial would go much faster. Blee agreed to this proposal. The girl became interested in what she had to do in return. The prince admitted that while the countess would be achieving her goals, he planned to perform only one action. Rodnus asked Bleer to help check Adriana's body. At that moment, the fellow traveler reached into his pocket to show him something. The guy handed over the envelope. The countess looked at the piece of paper in surprise and did not understand why. Blee, as soon as she opened the paper, immediately recognized the Elicorn language. Rodnus informed the girl that she needed to read it. At night, the prince decided to get drunk and sleep in the basement once again. Because of the noise, Neil came down to him. Rodnus did not want to justify his condition to the servant and immediately asked if the guy had succeeded. The guard replied that the matter was not yet finished. The prince was surprised that the worker had not yet resolved all the problems. Neil complained that it would have been much easier to obtain a resume. The guy clarified that he simply couldn't decide whether to put the imperial seal or one of the many titles of His Highness. Rodnus ordered to write on behalf of a commoner. Neil explained that if the prince explained the essence in more detail, the process could be sped up many times. The master said that the servant should not have been so fixated. The worker asked again what he had to do with his work experience. He reminded him that the prince had received 100 points in the Elikon language at the academy. Rodnus replied that since the servant knew everything perfectly well, there was no point in asking again. The fair-haired man was very irritated by the guard's worries. Neil agreed to write a letter on behalf of a commoner. But afterward, the guy said that people without statuses do not study at the academy. The servant joked that such knowledge was too good for a man who was simply helping a lady with her hobby. Rhodanus silently came closer. The servant immediately fell silent, expecting to be hit on the head by the master. But the prince only smiled contentedly. The guy noticed that the guard knew how to be sarcastic. He reminded him of the retrospective exhibition he was going to. Neil wondered why Rhodanus would show up at such an event. The gentleman did not want to explain and ordered the worker to do whatever was necessary. The prince specified that he would personally deliver everything needed to the place. His eyes shone in anticipation of serious work. In the morning, Rhodanus arrived with his guards to meet Blia. The servants remained outside and monitored the situation around. Neil couldn't forget the gentleman's words about the delivery. He asked his friend what exactly had happened to the prince. The guy asked Vincent if there was any point in trying to understand what was happening. The white-haired guard explained that once an order was given, it had to be carried out. Neil reasoned that interest in a woman appeared only when she was married. A friend pushed the guy away so that he would stop talking like a fool. Vincent noted that his friend had matured since he had learned to think radically. The servant suggested that there was some benefit to such a relationship with Madame. Neil said that Rhodanus and Bleer were the same age, so it was just a small date. In their country, cheating was not taken well, but that did not mean that the couple could be stopped by society. The guard was angry that the prince did not take into account the opinions of others on this matter. Vincent assumed that the gentleman clearly had his own plan. Neil loudly declared that Rhodanus should have ignored the emperor's summons, and that was it. His friend asked him to speak much more quietly, as there were people walking in the streets. The servant was sure that the second prince had been charmed by Bleer's handsome face and had been deceived by some unknown trick. Vincent laughed at his friend's convictions. The guard said that Neil and Rhodes were very similar in character. The guy was not particularly pleased with such arguments. The friend continued to speculate. He suggested that the couple had some connection with Archduchess Trovica. Neil recalled how the prince got drunk every night, as if he were Adriana's husband. Also, every drinking session was accompanied by bitter tears from Rhodanus. The guy said that it was all forbidden love. He hoped that those feelings of the master were in the past. At this time, the couple was already finishing their meeting. Bleer said that she wanted to see the prince in a week at the same time. The guy did not mind. The countess and Ionia went out into the street. The little one was carrying several books. It was clear from the lady's face that the conversation had gone well. Rhodanus went out to see his friend off. While Neil muttered something under his breath, Vincento looked at the prince. He wanted to know why such meetings were held. Soon, Adriana returned to the mansion. The girl was very tired, but there was still a lot of work to do. These meetings began only so that Bleer could learn to understand the Elikon language. She sat down at the table to continue her studies. The second prince turned out to be a good teacher. The guy told about all the basics and also explained the pronunciation of words. Rhodanus worked hard to teach his friend as quickly as possible. He constantly gave her homework. Blee was glad that the training was easy. The girl was very interested in listening to the prince with help, so all the assignments did not cause difficulties. Jonah and Marge watched this process. The little one saw her mistress being trained for the first time. The second servant was also surprised. While doing her homework, Adriana became curious about the contents of that diary. The heroine did not expect that the grammar of the Elikon language was so easy. The girl decided to postpone the task of Rhodanus. Blee walked over to the vanity. She quickly pulled out the stool, eager to learn the secrets of the body's former owner. Adriana took the diary and began to study it. Previously, no matter how much she tried to look, she always saw just scribbles. But thanks to the prince, the heroine could finally read something. She ran her hand over the sheet of paper, remembering her last lesson. The very first sentence was about how unhappy Adriana Peretta was. The girl's body trembled. The diary said that Noevian had found a cure. But it was specified that the Archduchess did not have long to live. The previous owner of the body wrote that Adriana was showing numerous symptoms, and there was no time to save her. The heroine was confused and could not read the next line. But having calmed down, she figured it out and realized that Noevian was killing his beloved. Bly jumped back from the table with a scream. The girl caught a vase, which easily broke. The countess clutched her face. Noevian had always said that he loved his wife, but it turned out to be a lie. The heroine recalled how she cried with her lover in bed. Adriana assured him that she would soon recover and become a support for the guy. Noavian constantly tried to console his wife. The husband said that her existence was already a real strength and help. The Archduke repeated that he loved Adriana, but all those words turned out to be just a deception to destroy his beloved. Blee held the rose and the glass. Many small wounds appeared on her palm, and all the delicate skin was covered with blood. The girl squeezed this plant harder out of anger. She couldn't control herself, because life seemed to be on the other side. All this time, all the servants said that Bleer was Noavian's mistress. Even Count Acacia knew the whole truth. Adriana stood back up. The girl wanted to look at her face, as if she wanted to talk to the real owner of the body. The heroine screamed, accusing Bleer of conspiring with Noavian. She wanted to find out what exactly the lovers were trying to achieve. Adriana said that the former owner of the body would never come back to life. The girl specified that since the Countess stole her lover, she would take everything else. The poor girl said that she was constantly worried about what happened to the previous Bly. Iona and her friend tried to call the lady. Adriana gradually calmed down. The girl stated that even if the Countess had returned to life, the vessel would have already been occupied. The heroine decided that God simply took pity on her, because the poor thing died a lousy death. But in return, the Almighty punished Bly because she was arrogant. Adriana adjusted her hair, doing it as in her previous life. The Archduchess was reborn in the same form she was accustomed to. The girl specified that this body was now completely in her possession. From that moment on, the brunette wanted to end her useless wanderings and troubled times. Adriana claimed to be Blija. The heroine went out onto the balcony to see the bright sky with stars. The Countess came to the edge. She wanted that couple to suffer more than they had suffered in their past life. Adriana wanted to see Noavian cry and wait for the moment when the guy would vomit all his insides. The girl was never an excellent student at the academy. She always dreamed of being one, but her body did not obey. The heroine had to drop out of school and give up the cherished good education that many common people dreamed of. But if the professor had asked her to describe her feelings about transforming into her lover's mistress, then Adriana would have been an excellent student in this topic. The girl made an appointment to meet around midnight. Roadness arrived at the appointed place on time. The prince finally heard the carriage. The boy was surprised that this time Bleer was a little late. Approaching the cart, Roadness stood in bewilderment. After all, no one was going to get out from inside. The guy had no right to open the door. He tried to call the lady, but she didn't respond at all. The prince had no choice but to go in. Rodanus wondered why the Countess was acting so strangely. The soldier saw Blee crying. The girl tried to smile and hid her bloody palms. Rodanus immediately noticed the fresh wounds. His eyes lit up with anger because he thought that his friend had been beaten. The prince sat down next to him. The guy grabbed his hand rather roughly and asked what had happened in the estate. Blee remained silent and only began to cry harder. Rodanus assumed that the girl needed help. The Countess said one word, the name Noviana. The prince wiped away Madame's tears and decided that a relative had arranged it all. The friend added that she wanted to kill the Archduke. Rodanus was stunned, not expecting to hear such a statement. Bleer calmed down a little and continued the conversation. She asked what the most brutal way to destroy Noavian was. In the morning, the heroine returned to the mansion. In the estate, everyone was very worried about the mistress. Blee locked herself in her bedroom again. The girl lay on the bed and hugged that diary. The brunette was constantly looking at one point. She was thinking only about the night conversation with the prince. At the meeting, the prince honestly stated that he planned to help the Countess until he saw Adriana's body. Rodanus explained that he did not understand the terrible relationship between Bleer and Noavian, which began because of the Archduchess. The boy was treating his girlfriend's bloody hands. The second prince explained that Mr. Troic was his brother's main patron. So the fair-haired one decided to pretend that this conversation had never happened. Bleer agreed to these conditions. The girl specified that Rodanus' cooperation was enough as punishment. The Countess couldn't lie in one place all the time. The brunette went down to the floor and buried her face in her knees so that no one would hear the crying. Iona decided to go inside without knocking. The lady said that she was going to be alone. The little one was very worried about Bleer. The servant specified that she would return to check on the Countess in an hour. She was holding something in her hands. The heroine decided that Marge had sent the servant. The girl asked what was happening in the mansion. Iona came closer. The little one handed over an envelope and said that it had been sent quite recently. Bleer snatched the piece of paper and sat down on the bed. The servant saw her mistress's gaze and was afraid that the letter was telling something terrible. But the countess's face suddenly changed. The girl said that the envelope contained an invitation from Noevian. The lady asked for help in preparation so that her appearance would be as usual, bright and provocative.